Why was no one listening to her? The Situation Room felt like a storm trapped inside four walls, voices colliding, tempers flaring. A hostage rescue mission in Syria had collapsed, and now 40 men were trying to outshout each other to figure out why. The intel was bad. The extraction window was closing. And somewhere in all that noise and all that chaos, a truth was trying to break through. But no one was listening. In the back corner of the room, standing alone, was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell. She held a tablet in both hands. Her posture was straight, professional, controlled, but her jaw was tight. 3 times she'd tried to speak. 3 times she'd been shut down before finishing a sentence. She'd found the discrepancy in the satellite imagery, the one detail that explained everything. The reason the mission went sideways. But every time she opened her mouth, someone talked over her. "Excuse me if I could just—" "Not now," Lieutenant Pearson snapped without even looking at her. His eyes stayed locked on the map in front of him, his finger jabbing at coordinates like they held all the answers. She tried again, her voice calm, measured. "The heat signatures indicate—" "Ma'am, with respect," another operator interrupted, his tone dripping with something that wasn't respect at all. "We've got actual trigger pullers trying to figure this out." Scattered chuckles rippled through the room, low, knowing, the kind of laughter that cuts deeper than insults. Sarah's fingers gripped the tablet a little harder, but she said nothing, because what could she say? That she'd seen combat, that she'd earned her place. That would only make it worse. Women who brag are arrogant. Women who stay quiet are incompetent. It's an impossible game, and she'd stopped trying to win it years ago. To them, she was just another staff officer, a paper pusher who'd never seen real combat, someone who got her rank through politically correct promotions and diversity initiatives rather than earning it in the field. For the past 4 days since she'd arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Command, the operators had made it painfully clear what they thought of her. "Babysitter from the Pentagon," she'd heard one of them mutter in the hallway. "Probably here to make sure we're being sensitive enough," another had joked in the mess hall. They didn't see her as a warfighter, they saw her as a quota, a bureaucrat, a liability, and maybe that should have made her angry. Maybe it should have made her want to storm out, demand respect, pull rank. But Sarah Mitchell had learned something a long time ago. Being underestimated isn't a weakness, it's an advantage. Because what they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to check, was that Sarah Mitchell was about to become their worst nightmare and their greatest asset. She just had to wait for exactly the right moment. And that moment was coming. Sarah Mitchell was 34 years old, quiet, unremarkable in the way she carried herself. She didn't have the swagger of the special operations community. She didn't throw around war stories or display her credentials like badges of honor. To the men of SEAL Team 7, she was invisible, just another support officer passing through, someone who'd never tasted dirt, never bled, never earned her place in their world. What none of them bothered to check, what none of them thought to ask, was where Sarah Mitchell came from before this assignment. Her personnel file, if they'd read past the first page, told a very different story. But why would they read it? They'd already decided who she was the moment she walked through the door. Sarah didn't start her career behind a desk. She started it at Annapolis, where she graduated top of her class in tactical operations. Then she went to flight school and became one of only 19 female fighter pilots in the Navy. For 6 years, she flew Fa-18 Super Hornets off carrier decks, combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan, danger-close air support for troops under fire, precision strikes in urban environments where one mistake meant civilian casualties. She earned a Distinguished Flying Cross after staying on station for 3 hours during a troops-in-contact situation, making gun runs with fuel so low her wingman begged her to break off. She didn't, not until every soldier made it out alive, her hands steady on the stick, her voice calm over the radio, because when people are dying on the ground, your job isn't to be safe. It's to make sure they get home. But then came the accident, a hard landing that wasn't her fault. The deck was wet, the wind was bad, the hook caught wrong. Her spine compressed on impact, and just like that, her flying career was over. The doctors were clear. She could walk. She could function. But she'd never fly combat missions again. Her back couldn't take the G-forces. Sarah faced a choice then: leave the Navy or find a new way to serve. She chose to reinvent herself. She went back to school, got a master's in strategic intelligence, became an expert in special operations planning and battlefield analysis, studied insurgent tactics, hostage rescue protocols, joint force operations. She buried herself in the work, in the theory, in the planning. Because if she couldn't be in the sky anymore, she'd make damn sure the people on the ground had the best plans possible. Then she did something almost no one does. She volunteered for a combat deployment as an intelligence officer embedded with a Marine Special Operations team in Somalia. For 18 months, she lived in the dirt with operators. She planned missions. She analyzed enemy patterns. She learned to think like them, talk like them. And slowly, reluctantly, they began to respect her. She was awarded a Bronze Star with Valor after she took command of a team when their leader was hit by an IED, called in a medevac under fire, held the position until reinforcements arrived, her hands covered in someone else's blood, her voice steady on the radio, because that's what you do. You don't fall apart. You don't panic. You do the job. But Sarah doesn't talk about any of this, because she learned a long time ago that women in the military face an impossible standard. If you brag, you're arrogant. If you're quiet, you're incompetent. If you demand respect, you're difficult. If you wait for it, you'll never get it. So she stopped trying to prove herself with words. She lets her work speak for itself. But this assignment is different, because Sarah Mitchell isn't here as a support officer. She's here as the new commanding officer of SEAL Team 7. She just hasn't told them yet. The decision to delay revealing her position was intentional. Command wanted her to observe the team first, to assess their readiness, their cohesion, their weaknesses before taking the reins. So for 4 days, Sarah has watched, listened, evaluated, and what she's seen hasn't been pretty. The team is fractured, arrogant, undisciplined in their briefings and overconfident in their planning. They've had 3 failed missions in the past 2 months, and instead of examining their processes, they blame bad luck and bad intel. Sarah has tried to offer insights, gently, carefully, without pulling rank, and every time she's been shut down. During a planning session for a raid on a Taliban compound, she suggested adjusting the approach route based on local terrain analysis. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Pearson said with barely concealed irritation, "I've run 50 raids in Afghanistan." The raid went ahead as planned. It was a dry hole. The targets had fled hours before. If they'd taken her route, the one that would have gotten them there 30 minutes faster, they might have caught them. Nobody acknowledged it, not a word. During a tactical debrief, she pointed out that their communication protocols were outdated and creating dangerous gaps in situational awareness. Chief Garrett, a grizzled 20-year veteran, actually laughed. "You've been here 4 days, ma'am." The next mission, a communication breakdown, nearly got 2 operators killed. Still no acknowledgement, still no apology, just silence and sideways glances. The worst moment came in the mess hall. Sarah was sitting alone, reviewing mission reports on her tablet, when 3 junior operators sat down nearby, close enough that she could hear every word. "How long you think she lasts?" one asked. "Until she realizes she's out of her depth and requests a transfer," another replied. "I give it 1 week." They laughed, not cruelly, not maliciously, just casually, like she was a punchline, a temporary inconvenience, something to be tolerated until she disappeared. Sarah kept her eyes on her screen, her face carefully neutral, but inside the anger was building, not the hot, impulsive kind, the cold, calculated kind, the kind that makes you wait for exactly the right moment, the kind that makes you patient. And that moment was almost here. Day 5, 800 hours. The entire team was assembled in the main briefing room for what they thought was a routine operational update. Sarah arrived early and took a seat in the back, as she had every other day. The operators filed in with coffee in hand, joking and relaxed. Most of them didn't even glance her way. Why would they? She was furniture. Background noise. Irrelevant. Lieutenant Pearson and Chief Garrett were up front, chatting about the weekend. Someone made a joke about a bar fight. Someone else complained about his ex-wife. Normal, comfortable, predictable. Then the door opened. Captain Reynolds, the group commander, walked in. The room snapped to attention instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Coffee cups lowered. Spines straightened. "Seats, gentlemen," Reynolds said. Everyone sat. The room settled into an expectant silence. Reynolds stood at the front, his expression unreadable, hard. He let the silence stretch for a moment, 2 moments, long enough that people started shifting in their seats. "We have a new commander," Reynolds said finally. A few confused glances. New commander, they already had a. The decision was made to have her observe your operations and team dynamics before assuming command. "Sir." Reynolds turned and looked directly at Sarah. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. You could have heard hearts stop. Sarah stood slowly. Every eye in the room was on her. 40 Navy SEALs. 40 men who dismissed her, mocked her, underestimated her for nearly a week. And now they were watching her walk to the front of the room, her boot steps echoing in the silence like a countdown. When she reached Reynolds, he extended his hand. She shook it, firm, professional. Her face gave nothing away. Reynolds addressed the room. "For those of you who didn't bother to read her complete personnel file, and I'm guessing that's all of you, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell is a former strike fighter pilot with 2 combat deployments, a Bronze Star with Valor, and 18 months embedded with MARSOC in East Africa." The shock on their faces was almost comical, mouths slightly open, eyes wide, like they'd just been told gravity worked backwards. Reynolds continued. "She's also completed advanced courses in special operations planning, intelligence fusion, and joint terminal attack control." He let that sink in, let it settle like ash after an explosion. "She's been watching you for 4 days." He turned to Sarah, nodded once, then he left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. Sarah stood alone in front of 40 Navy SEALs. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't say a word about the dismissals, the jokes, the casual cruelty. She simply opened her tablet and pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone who'd flown combat missions with fuel gauges in the red and enemy fire lighting up her cockpit. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah systematically dissected every mistake, every oversight, every tactical error the team had made in the past 8 weeks. She showed satellite imagery they'd misread, communication transcripts where critical information was lost, after-action reports where they blamed external factors instead of examining their own planning. It was surgical, precise, undeniable. "Mission Redstone," she said, pulling up a map. "You lost the target because your approach route was compromised. I flagged this 3 days ago during the planning review." Lieutenant Pearson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tight, his pride bleeding out in front of everyone. Operation Iron Fist. 2 operators nearly killed because of a communications gap. I recommended updating your protocols. Chief Garrett's jaw clenched, his knuckles white on the armrest. Sarah moved through each failure with the same calm precision, never raising her voice, never gloating, just presenting facts, data, truth. And with each slide, each example, the weight in the room grew heavier. When she finished, she set the tablet down and looked at them, really looked at them. "Questions?" Silence, the kind that feels like drowning. Then Chief Garrett stood. For a moment, Sarah thought he was going to walk out, thought he was going to storm off in wounded pride. Instead, he came to attention. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough, "I was wrong." One by one others followed, standing, acknowledging. Some looked her in the eye, some couldn't. Lieutenant Pearson was the last. His pride was clearly wounded, but to his credit he stood. "Commander," he said, "I didn't give you a fair chance. That was unprofessional." Sarah nodded, apology accepted. Then, with just a hint of a smile, "Now sit down, we have work to do." 2 days later, the impossible mission landed on their desk. A CIA operative was being held in a compound in Yemen. High-value target location. 12 hostile fighters confirmed, possibly more. The structure was a fortress, thick walls, limited entry points, surrounded by open ground with no cover, every angle exposed, every approach a death trap. Every other team had turned it down. Too risky, too many unknowns, too likely to end with body bags coming home. SEAL Team 7 got the call because they were the last option, the desperate option. The initial planning session was tense. The team looked to Sarah now, really looked to her, not with skepticism, not with doubt, but with something that felt a lot like hope. "Ma'am," Pearson said, and this time there was genuine respect in his voice, "I don't see how we get in without taking casualties." Sarah studied the imagery for a long moment. Satellite photos, thermal scans, structural analysis. Her mind working through angles, timelines, possibilities. Then she saw it, a detail so small most people would have missed it. "There," she pointed, "the compound's water system. It's fed by an underground aqueduct that runs from the hills." Garrett leaned in, squinted at the screen. "I think it's our only chance." "The cistern opening is inside the compound," one operator said. "That's a hell of a gamble, ma'am. What if it's collapsed? What if it's too small?" Sarah met his eyes, held his gaze. "Then we improvise." She pulled up historical construction records, cross-referenced them with terrain data, built a complete infiltration plan in 3 hours. It was brilliant. Risky, but brilliant. The kind of plan that required absolute precision and absolute trust. The mission was greenlit, but Sarah wasn't just planning this one. She was going. "Ma'am, with respect," Pearson said carefully, "you don't need to be on the ground for this." "Yes, I do," Sarah replied. "You're going into an unknown tunnel system based on my analysis. If I'm wrong, you need someone there who can adapt the plan in real time." She was suited up and on the helicopter before anyone could argue further. Helmet on, weapon checked, her hands steady, because this was what she'd trained for. This was why she'd reinvented herself after the crash. To be here, to do this, to make sure her people came home. The insertion was clean. They reached the aqueduct entrance in the hills without incident. A crumbling stone archway half buried in sand. Ancient, forgotten. Perfect. Sarah went in first. The tunnel was tight, dark. It smelled like stagnant water and centuries of decay. They moved in single file, night vision painting everything in eerie green. 200 meters in, they hit a collapse. The tunnel was blocked, a wall of rubble and stone cutting off their path. "Damn it," Garrett muttered behind her. Sarah moved forward, examining the collapse with her flashlight, her mind racing, recalculating, adapting. Then she saw it. "No, look, there's a gap on the left side." "Ma'am, that's barely 2 feet wide." "Then we go one at a time." She went first, always first, because that's what leaders do. They don't ask their people to do anything they wouldn't do themselves. She pulled herself through the narrow gap, her body pressed against cold stone. Sharp rocks tore at her gear, scraped her arms. For a moment she was stuck, wedged. Panic flickered in her chest like a trapped bird, but she forced it down, exhaled completely, made herself smaller, and pulled herself through. The others followed, one by one, trusting her, following her into the dark. They emerged inside the cistern exactly where Sarah had predicted. The team fanned out, silent, efficient. Sarah directed them via hand signals. Positions she'd planned down to the inch, every movement deliberate, every angle covered. The assault was textbook perfect, 12 hostiles neutralized, CIA operative recovered, shaken but alive, 0 friendly casualties, not a single scratch. As they exfilled with the rescued operative, Pearson moved up beside Sarah. He didn't say anything at first, just walked beside her in the darkness. Then quietly, "That was incredible, ma'am." Sarah didn't respond. She was already thinking about the debrief, the lessons learned, the next mission, because the work never stops, the responsibility never lifts. That's the weight of command. Back at base, Captain Reynolds called Sarah into his office. "I've been getting calls all morning," he said, leaning back in his chair. "JSOC wants to know who planned that Yemen op. CIA is singing your praises." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. Sarah picked it up. It was a letter, signed by every member of SEAL Team 7, every single one. "Commander Mitchell, we were wrong about you. You've earned our respect and our trust. It's an honor to serve under your command." Sarah read it slowly, let the words sink in. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small smile. The team room was different now. When Sarah walked in, operators actually stopped and listened. They asked her opinion. They deferred to her expertise, not because they had to, because they wanted to. She was sitting in on a planning session when Garrett approached with coffee, an offering, a peace treaty in a paper cup. "Why didn't you just tell us who you were on day one?" he asked. Sarah considered the question, took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible, like all military coffee, but she drank it anyway. "Because if I'd walked in here pulling rank and demanding respect, you would have given it to me out of obligation. I needed you to trust me because I earned it." Garrett nodded slowly. "That took guts." "That's why you're not a co-chief," she said with a small grin. He laughed, a real laugh. "Fair enough, ma'am." That night, Sarah sat alone in her quarters looking at a photo on her desk. It was from her fighter pilot days. Her standing on the deck of a carrier next to her Super Hornet, helmet under her arm. Young, fierce, unbreakable. She wasn't that person anymore. The crash had changed her, taken away the thing she loved most. The freedom of the sky, the rush of the flight deck, the pure, uncomplicated clarity of combat flying. But it also gave her something else, perspective, purpose, a different kind of strength. She learned that respect isn't given because of your title or your past accomplishments. It's earned through competence, consistency, and courage. She learned that being underestimated isn't an insult. It's an advantage. Because when people expect nothing from you, you have the freedom to exceed every expectation. And she learned that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most prepared, the most reliable, the one who makes the hard calls and lives with the consequences. Sarah Mitchell walked into SEAL Team 7 as a ghost, invisible, dismissed, irrelevant. But she walked into that briefing room wearing her commander insignia and changed everything. Not because she demanded respect, but because she earned it. One mission, one decision, one perfect plan at a time. And now, when her team goes into the dark, they do it with absolute confidence. Because they know their commander won't let them fail. She never has, and she never will. Sometimes dignity doesn't demand to be seen. It simply acts. And in the end, that's the only thing that matters.